So our next speaker is Kim Cressman of Catbird Stats, who will be talking on behalf of the various reserves whose data she has been analyzing.
Thank you, Kirstine. Like Kirstine said, I'm working with a variety of reserves, but I'm formerly with Grand Bay in Mississippi, and I'm still working with a lot of you wonderful people on some very interesting projects. Next. Today, I'm talking to you about a project called SETr, where we developed tools to use the programming language R to analyze surface elevation table data. But the use of R was made in such a way that you do not have to be an R expert to use it. You just hit some buttons and bloop, 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 magic happens if it's working well. The idea was to create repeatable data entry, QA/QC, and analysis, not just for the reserves, but that could be transferable to others. Next, please. Along the way, we did design a spreadsheet that I'm not really talking about here, but I'm always happy to talk more. But also a lot of visualizations, and this is what people think is really cool, even people outside the reserves. Megan showed you a version of this for some of her sets at Wacoit. These are a couple from Grand Bay, and what you can see is a set trend in blue, how that particular set elevation is changing, and then a sea level trend in red. On the left, they are generally tracking each other, and on the right, they are very much not, and we worry about that. We want our marshes to keep up with sea level rise. Now, I will note that this red is the slope of long-term sea level rise, and as others have mentioned, shorter-term sea level rise is higher than long-term, so that is something to think about. And we do provide analyses both ways, just this illustration as long-term. Next. We also provided maps. This is Goodwin Islands at Chesapeake Bay, Virginia, and it's just a really nice way to see spatially which sets are gaining elevation and which are losing. Relative to sea level rise, this is not relative to zero, but who's gaining elevation faster than sea level rise are those up arrows in blue, and who is not are the ones in red. Again, we also made maps for long-term sea level rise, and 19-year water level change is what we called it. We didn't want to use the term sea level rise for a shorter scale, but we did want to use that shorter scale time period. Next. We can also summarize the data within a reserve in a variety of ways. The graph on the upper right is one that we fondly call the Star Wars graph because those bars look like TIE fighters. But what you're seeing is each of those dots and whiskers represents a single surface elevation table at a reserve. The red dot is the estimate, and those whiskers around it are the confidence interval for how much that set is changing. The vertical line is sea level rise, and sea level rise also has a confidence interval around it. So that is that shaded blue part. And you can see some of these are doing really well, chugging along above sea level rise. Some of them are not doing so well, increasing. It's greater than zero, but it is not as much as sea level rise. And so when we want to start scaling up to regional or national summaries, how do we do this without putting 144 rows on one graph? Well, we turned to pie charts. So what you can see from the dark blue ones that Kirstine was highlighting first, they're dark blue on this pie chart. And that's 3 of the sets gaining elevation higher than sea level rise, and the confidence intervals don't overlap with that of sea level rise. This is not the same as a statistically significant difference. You can actually have a fair bit of overlap and still get p less than 0.05, but because there were different statistical methods involved in calculating the rates, getting off in the weeds, that was the best way we could represent it. Do we feel pretty good that these are really different from sea level rise? The red ones, of course, are not. And then the lighter red and lighter blue are where that estimate, the point, is greater or less than, but the confidence intervals do overlap, so we're less confident. Next. And then we can put those on a map. One of the things that we did for the synthesis report at the end was we broke this down into regions, and actually you could see the pie charts for 3 or 4 reserves at a time, and we could put that Star Wars graph with them so you could see what was really happening. But then to scale up to the whole system, we just put them all on a map. This one is compared to 19-year water level change. So it's not really a rosy picture with these more recent rates of water level change. Marshes are not necessarily keeping up too well. Next. So the project was originally funded from 2018 to 2020, but it was meant to help people move forward. It was meant to provide a way for you to enter your own data and work with it. There's an interactive QA/QC app, so you can see various metrics of how things are looking just within your data before you run the analyses. And then you hit a button and you can get some different outputs, not only for the really techie people at a reserve, but there's also a version for the educators where we're building up that Star Wars graph just one layer at a time, training students how to read graphs, but then also linking it to the surface elevation process and importance. During the project, we had 14 reserves and over 50 advisors from many, many different states and agencies. This is still used annually by several reserves, and I have been getting questions from some other reserves that are moving their data into this format. Other agencies are also building on the code, actually developing their own internal R packages to make the visualizations. So even though they're not using the spreadsheets in the same way we are, they want these visualizations and they're building on it. And I also want to make the plug, Kirstine mentioned that we are making a pitch for funding for wetlands and water levels moving forward, and some of that is ongoing maintenance. I do believe we need a system-wide database for this. I do not believe we should be keeping it in spreadsheets for all time. These spreadsheets we developed for SETr are good and helpful. They've gotten everybody's data into a uniform format, so it'll be easier to transition when that database happens, but I don't believe it's a replacement for a database. I think we should still do that. We are well ahead of schedule right now, but that's all I've got for you. So thank you, and I'll happily take any questions.
We definitely have plenty of time for questions, so think about whether you have a set question, put it in the chat, or come off mute. I guess I have one for you, Kim. I was just reading the new papers that came out in Estuaries and Coasts on SET, the special SET edition, and the one that has Philippe Hensel, who we know on there, talked about the role of vertical land motion, and that especially subsidence may make those change some from blue to red or make red ones even redder of what's happening underneath the sets. Could you envision updating SETr to include sort of the closest vertical land station measurement and movement measurement and including that in the are you tracking things analyses?
Yes, I think the hardest part of that would be figuring out what we'd be adding in. But if we get a number to add in and compare it to, absolutely, that would be easy. I see a question in the chat. Would it make sense to do one pie chart for the whole system? Is there something to be gained to see it nationally? Kirstine's nodding, and I would like to defer to other people. I'm a data expert, and I think other people here are more set and elevation experts than me. But Kirstine seems to think yes.
I mean, I think this sort of is a good transition to tell people that a bunch of us, who include Rebecca and Kim, are thinking about a national state of the estuaries dashboard that could share some visualizations of our national data. And these are just the types of questions we'll be asking, is like, what can you do with some really simple visualizations of how are we doing as a nation? But then you can zoom in and look by region within a reserve and so on. And so stay tuned. We'll have some visualizations that are aimed at sort of a broad audience in the next year. And Kyle thinks it would be interesting too.
Can the categories be doing okay? And uh-oh. From my perspective, yes, but that might get shot down by others.